Hi, and welcome back to the show. I'm Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, and believe it or not, it's been a year. After an exciting launch last January, I'm thrilled that the Savvy Psychologist show ended its first year as one of the iTunes best podcasts of 2014. But more importantly, gained the support of fantastic listeners like you. So today, first we'll hear about our sponsor, and then we'll get into our anniversary episode. So I was asked, what have I learned after a year of hosting the podcast? Well, aside from learning that the best episode ideas come from listeners, and that surprisingly good recording acoustics can be achieved by surrounding myself with piles of laundry, I've also read hundreds of scientific papers this year. So, in honor of the first anniversary of the podcast, here are the 5 essential tips I've learned about living a happier, healthier life in the new year. Now, essential tip number 1 is exercise, and I can hear you groaning already, but I've been blown away by the research on the mental health benefits of exercise. For example, a 2007 study found that exercise was comparable to antidepressants in treating major depression, and a 2011 follow-up found it also helped prevent depression relapse. And aside from depression, exercise treats PTSD, ADHD, panic, social anxiety, pretty much any mental health challenge you can name. Plus, it's been used to help people quit smoking, sleep better, improve energy, sharpen cognitive functioning, and increase libido. If you could bottle it, you'd make millions. But what really sold me was a series of studies on exercise and dementia from episode 31, 4 Tips for Alzheimer's Prevention. So Alzheimer's runs in my family. And while I know there's no silver bullet, I'll do pretty much anything to prevent or delay the disease. And the clincher was this. A 2011 study looked at the effect of exercise on those with the ApoE4 gene, a gene that puts you at higher risk for developing Alzheimer's. It's carried by about 25% of people, and differences in the brain regions most affected by Alzheimer's are already visible in babies who carry the gene. So the study examined 4 groups of senior citizens, those who had the ApoE4 gene and exercised moderately, no extreme marathon runners or boot camp instructors here, just walkers or joggers, those who had the gene and didn't exercise, and those without the ApoE4 gene who either did or did not exercise. So the researchers scanned everybody's brain and then, for 18 months, just let the participants do their thing. Then they scanned their brains again. In just a year and a half, those who had the E4 gene but didn't exercise lost about 3% of their hippocampus, a part of the brain that specializes in memory. Of those with the E4 gene who did exercise regularly, almost no hippocampal loss at all, same as the folks without the gene. So, of course, Alzheimer's is a lot more than just loss of hippocampal volume, but the general lesson is this. Regular, moderate exercise you enjoy is protective in too many ways to count. As for me, I'm still honing my system, but thanks to writing the podcast, I finally exercise more days than not, and when I fall off the wagon, I'm quicker to get back on. Essential tip number 2, play multiple roles. So I talked about wearing several hats in one of my most popular episodes. No, not the porn one. It was Why Am I So Tired?, where a study of over 1,300 mothers found that moms who work part-time have less depression and better physical health than stay-at-home moms. So I've got to say, nowadays, staying at home can be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, or with the cost of childcare skyrocketing, an economic necessity. But what is it about part-time work that's so beneficial? And how can folks who work full-time, stay-at-home moms or dads, or anyone else for that matter, get in on the action? Well, I don't have a definitive answer, but I think a clue lies in an old 1992 study that followed a group of over 300 women for more than 30 years. The women were followed from 1956 to 1986, and it was found that occupying multiple roles, including being a wife, mother, working, volunteering, church-going, and/or belonging to a club or organization in 1956, was linked to good health 30 years later. And this was even after controlling for income and illness, thereby busting the myth that only rich or super healthy women can fill multiple roles. But you don't have to choose the traditional 1950s mix of marriage, parenting, an office job, and church, although you certainly could. You might also do freelance writing while working as a tattoo artist and playing in a bike polo league. Or work a day job while you go to community college and mentor someone through AA. Or be a stay-at-home parent and volunteer t-ball coach. Anything goes, as long as it's more than one thing. Call it multiple roles, or call it balance. For me, I used to feel like I was half-assing everything. Work, motherhood, writing, and that I should just fish or cut bait and pick one to focus on primarily. But these studies made me feel validated, and I stopped feeling guilty all the time. Turns out, my multiple hats fit just fine. Essential tip number 3. Look for what's beneath the anger. So one of the most useful psychological facts I've ever learned is that anger is a secondary emotion. It comes out to cover a softer primary emotion like guilt, shame, hurt, insecurity, or fear. So when you find yourself on the receiving end of a red-faced diatribe or an all-caps email, take a moment, or a day or two, to soothe yourself, but then dig for the true emotion under the vitriol. Figuring out that your hater's anger was just a front for feeling rejected, invalidated, or humiliated makes it a lot easier not only to empathize, but also to respond in a non-angry way. And it's hard because usually our brains interpret anger coming at us as a threat of potential harm. So we get scared, and our brains cover our fear with, you guessed it, anger. But break the cycle, and you'll be surprised. So my feet were held to the fire after the Myths About Domestic Violence episode. Some listeners were incensed that I'd left out the possibility of straight men being the victims of domestic violence. And after a lot of cycling between feeling guilty, they're totally right, defensive, why does no one listen? I even said the episode was for women, and hurt, they don't have to be jerks about it. I wrote a bonus episode called Can Men Be Victims of Domestic Violence, addressing the topic. And I also wrote Each Man Back, which, as someone admittedly averse to conflict, raised my heart rate more than a little. Long story short, I tried really hard to be empathetic, and guess what? They were total sweethearts. We wrote back and forth a bunch of times, and now we are BFFs. Everyone involved came out a winner. Essential tip number 4. Remember that self-control can be grown, but is fundamentally finite. So it's unclear who said it first, Thomas Edison or Woody Allen, but 90% of success is showing up. And whatever your goal, your personal equivalent of the light bulb or a Golden Globe Lifetime Achievement Award, the trick is to stay focused both in the moment and over the long haul. So the show covered both these concepts this year: self-control, which is resisting temptation in the moment, and grit, which is persevering through ups and downs over time. And whatever your gritty long-term project, whether you're finishing your degree, starting your own business, or saving for a house, the process is filled with short-term decision points where self-control is in order. And in the episode on self-control, we talked about a classic 1998 study where each participant sat at a table with a plate of cookies and a plate of radishes. Some lucky ducks were asked to eat the cookies, while others were asked to eat the radishes. Then each participant was asked to work on a secretly impossible-to-solve puzzle. Now, what happened? So, those who were forced to burn their self-control by resisting the forbidden cookies gave up on the puzzle after about 8 minutes. But those who were allowed to eat the cookies, and therefore had self-control to spare, worked on the puzzle for more than twice as long, about 19 minutes. And the lesson? Self-control, also called willpower, is a finite resource. Subsequent studies have shown it can be strengthened, much like a muscle, but even the strongest muscles can get exhausted. As for me, I finally stopped beating myself up about not being able to focus or be efficient past about 9 p.m. And it took way too many years to realize that I was getting sucked into web surfing because my self-control was depleted, not to mention I was simply exhausted. And I still struggle with how much time I spend on YouTube, but at least I don't feel as bad about it. And essential tip number 5 is learn in public. So while researching the episode on imposter syndrome, I stumbled across the concept of the public amateur, or the purposeful imposter. So the lesson is learn in public. With most new ventures, you're not going to emerge perfectly formed like Athena from the head of Zeus. Instead, you have to take those tentative first steps out in the open. So, for example, a friend of mine, when first learning Mandarin Chinese, accidentally asked a waiter for an order of chicken droppings, and then told her grandmother she was sexually excited to see her. Today she's fluent, and she got some good stories out of it, but the point is that there was no other way to learn than by practicing in public. Same thing for you. Going back to school, starting a new job, launching a business, even starting a blog will feel suspiciously like learning to ride a bike or drive a car for the first time. You'll experience the equivalent of stalling out on the highway a few times, but each time will be necessary to your eventual success. As for me, I'm proud of many of this year's episodes, but some of the early ones sound a little clunky and hesitant to me now. But I chalk it up to learning in public. And with luck, this coming year, I'll get the chance to screw up something new and exciting. So go ahead and try, even if others are watching. And if you suck, remember the pratfall effect from the How to Deal with Rejection episode. A few screw-ups not only keep you real, they make you more attractive. So in short, this new year, dance like nobody's watching, especially if everybody is. If something you heard on the podcast has helped you in the last year, let me know by liking on Facebook, adding me to your Google Plus circles, or sending the link to a transcript to someone important to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Dr. Ellen Hendrickson. And next week, if you keep a journal, or you aspire to, we'll cover tips to supercharge your writing and the link between journaling and good health. In the meantime, a transcript of this episode, references for the studies I mentioned, and links to all the other episodes I talked about today are at quickanddirtytips.com/savvy-psychologist. And I always have to say, the Savvy Psychologist is strictly for informational purposes and doesn't substitute for mental health care from a licensed professional. Thank you again, and I'll see you next week for a happier, healthier mind.